Here at Cork and Fizz, I'm all about helping you discover new wines. Yes, I know it's easy to just continue to buy your favorite bottle, but I have to tell you, you're missing out. Did you know there are over 10,000 different grape varieties and over 65,000 wine producers worldwide? Trust me, there are so many more delicious wines out there for you to try, and your next favorite bottle is just waiting for you to find it. In an effort to encourage you to try something new, I'm bringing back my free summer wine challenge. That's right, it's free. Head to the link in my show notes, corkandfizz.com/summer wine challenge to sign up. This challenge will last 6 weeks, and during that time, all I ask is that you try 6 new wines and fill out a simple tasting form on my website for each one. I'll also be sending you exclusive weekly emails with recommendations for regions and wines to explore. Plus, you'll have access to not one, but 2 free live virtual tastings where you get to learn about and taste wine with me and fellow challenge goers. If you successfully taste and record 6 new wines in the 6 weeks, you'll receive a class pass, which gives you access to a virtual tasting party of your choosing with my tasting club, the Cork Crew. Plus, everyone who completes the challenge will be entered to win a free 1-year membership to the Cork Crew, with one lucky winner being chosen at the end of July. We start June 19th, but you can sign up anytime between now and before the challenge ends on July 30th. Head to the link in my show notes to join me. Oh, and did I mention it's free? Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. Today we are doing a new installment in my Grape Deep Dive mini-series. Today we are talking about a red wine that unfortunately just doesn't get the attention that it deserves, and we're going to talk about why that is. But we're going to talk about Merlot. And I'm curious, now that I've said that, what is the first thing that comes to mind when I say Merlot? What do you think of when you see Merlot on the menu? I'll be honest, I tend to glaze over it. I don't actively dislike Merlot, but if I ever see it on a tasting list or on a restaurant list, I'm never drawn to try it. And I honestly think that has more to do with general public views on Merlot and some different media aspects as well, rather than how the wine actually tastes. And the more that I did this research, and I'm hoping by the end of this episode that I might be able to change your mind, because I think I changed my mind while I was doing the research. And the thing is, Merlot doesn't have the best reputation. And I mean, we could probably all just blame famous actor Paul Giamatti. We all know it's his fault that we don't like Merlot. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll get to it later in this episode. But like I said, hopefully by the end, I will have convinced you that Merlot is a really incredible grape that makes incredible wine. And it is so worth trying the next time you see it on a list or see it at a wine shop. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, you know me, we got to start with a little bit of history. And I feel like even just knowing the history will make you want to try Merlot a little bit more. So, Merlot was believed to have originated in Bordeaux, which is in southwest France in the 1780s. And I say southwest France, hold that in your brain because we're going to talk about some other areas in France and why I'm not totally convinced that Merlot originated in Bordeaux. So, again, think southwest France, that's like, the bottom left corner if you're looking at the map. So this is where the first mention of it shows up. It said Merlot, it makes a black and excellent wine and is productive in good soil. This was in the 1780s. However, it was spelt Merlau. Obviously, today it is spelt different. Today's spelling wouldn't be seen until at least, what is that, like 40 years later in 1824. The name Merlot actually means little blackbird in the regional dialect of Bordeaux. This bird reportedly loved eating the Merlot grapes. Now, back to where it originated. So it was believed that Bordeaux is the birthplace, but like I said, I'm not convinced. So let's talk about why. And to do that, we need to talk about Merlot's parents. New varieties are always created when one grapevine pollinates a different variety's grapevine, right? Each grape that you are familiar with, Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, they all have two parents that were each grapevines before it, right? And potentially still. Those two grapes become the parents of the new grape that is created. So Merlot, who are Merlot's parents? It has been known since the 1990s, thanks to DNA profiling, that one of Merlot's parents is Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is also one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon. If you want to learn more about Cabernet Franc, I actually did a deep dive into that grape in a previous episode. I'll put the number in the show notes because I have no idea what number it was. Now, again, Cabernet Franc is most known in the Loire Valley and in Bordeaux, but it actually originated in the Basque country of Spain, or so the legend goes. So this is one of the parents. Cabernet Franc originated in the Basque country of Spain. Now, if you sail directly north from the city of Bilbao in Basque country, you'd hit the region of Brittany, France. This is in North France, all right? We're in Northwest France, right? This is nowhere near Bordeaux. In Brittany, this is where ampelographers, fancy name for grape botanists, eventually found Merlot's other parent. We could call it its mom, so to say, if we're going to say Cabernet Franc is the dad. There is no gender in all this, but I think it just makes it easier if we say mom and dad, right? Okay, so mom is Cabernet Franc, or dad is the Cabernet Franc, and these ampelographers finally found the mom after 10 years of searching. This grape was first sampled in 1996 in northern Brittany, France, the cuttings of which were taken from an abandoned vine on the slope of a hill called Mont Gorat. Now, 4 years later, four more plants of this grape were found, and they were found just like casually in the front yards of some homes in four different villages. Like nothing like just casually having Merlot's long lost parent in your front yard. I mean, I don't know about you, but around Seattle, there are a few places that have, just wild grapevines in the back. None of them are as special as the parent of Merlot. But here, if you happen to be in the area of Brittany, France, you might have a famous grape in your backyard or your front yard. Who knows? This grape, so these grapes that were in front of those homes, they were locally known as Raisin de la Madeleine because the grapes were ripe by the holiday of Saint Madeleine on July 22nd. My anniversary with Mr. Cork and Fizz, actually. But that is like real early to have grapes ripe by then. So it makes sense why they kind of like called it by that. They're like, hey, these ripen real early. Now, there are a lot of different Madeleine grapes, apparently. So they ended up changing the name a little bit to Madeleine Noir de Charente. So all this said, if Merlot's mom came from northern France, because that's where we found it, and its dad came from the Basque country in Spain, it seems pretty wild that the first Merlot plant was created in Bordeaux. Unless, of course, it just so happened that somebody brought vine cuttings from each of those to Bordeaux. But the thing is, you would see this Madeleine grape in Bordeaux, but you do. So I don't know about you, but I'm just like not convinced that Bordeaux is the birthplace of Merlot. But who am I to decide? Let's talk a little bit about the viticulture of Merlot before we get into the wine itself. So let's talk about the grape and the grapevine first. Starting off, this grape is early budding. Remember, a grapevine has four essential, what do I want to say, cycles that it goes through, or at least it changes within the seasons, right? So during the winter, it's dormant. And then early spring is when it's going to start budding. And that is before it flowers. And then when it flowers, after that, you end up getting the grapes from the flowers. And then you harvest the grapes, and then it goes back into dormancy over the winter. So it is early budding. That means you are going to start to see the little buds coming out sooner than you would for other grapes. This makes it susceptible to bad weather in the spring, especially things like hailstorms or high winds. It is mid-ripening, so it doesn't ripen as early as its mom does, but it does ripen sooner than a lot of other grapes in the fall. So whenever you're going to go harvest, that likely means you're going to harvest Merlot before you would harvest some other grapes. It is moderate to extremely vigorous, aka if you just let it do its thing, it would make a lot of grapes. It will be high yielding if not controlled. And typically, if you're not wanting to make a good wine, you do not want it to come from high yielding grapes. You want them to have a smaller number of grapes so that the flavors are more concentrated. Merlot grapevines are well suited to clay limestone soils. And I'm telling you this because when we talk about some of the regions where it comes from, you're going to hear me say clay and limestone. You'll be like, that makes sense why it does well there, because it likes clay limestone soils. It also likes rocky, well-draining soils in mountainous regions. All of these things are going to control the yields of the grapevine so that it becomes more concentrated. That's a good thing. It is also successful as a grape. It is one of the top grapes thanks to what it has inherited from its parents. So from Cabernet Franc, it got a high quality phenolic compound. What that means is it gets the tannins, like really well structured tannins, not necessarily a lot of them, but they have the right structure to just give the wine something to like stand up on and give it a good backbone. It also has these anthocyanins, which give it really beautiful color. And hey, those anthocyanins are what make wine healthy, apparently. Though, you know my stance on that. Wine is not healthy, it's alcohol. Come on, people. So that was from Cabernet Franc. And then from the Magdalene grape, it got early ripening and fertility. So again, that earliness, so you don't have to wait until later in the fall where there's more weather that can ruin it. You can pick it a little bit early. And then that fertility has to do with the high yields, which might not necessarily be a good thing, but we'll talk about that. Now, moving on to the wine that is made from Merlot. Just in general, it is often referred to as a chameleon. This is because it can come in many different styles. It can be fruity, smooth, and easygoing, or on the flip side, it can be age-worthy, full-bodied, and sophisticated. It is actually often mistaken for Cabernet Sauvignon, which to me makes me think that that must mean it is a top quality wine and a grape that makes really incredible wines, because if you can mistake it for Cabernet Sauvignon, which is one of the most popular wines in the world, if not the most popular, then hey, it's got to be some pretty good stuff. Maybe we're not giving it the attention it deserves. Flavor-wise, from your Merlot, you can expect things like blackberry, cassis, which if you don't know what that is, neither did I. I had to look this up. It is the French term for black currants. And again, if you're like, that still doesn't tell me anything, I don't know what black currants taste like, you and I are alike. I had to look this up as well. Black currants are strong, tart. They're almost like a grape cherry combo. So think about that flavor or that aroma as well, right? When we say flavor, we also have to think about the aroma coming from the wine. Baked cherry, plum, licorice, mocha, dark chocolate, vanilla, and bay leaf. Structure-wise, right, when we're kind of feeling the structure and the texture of it, it is usually quite smooth and round. It can be plump. It is less tannic than Cabernet Sauvignon, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have some good tannins in it. It is refreshing, but it doesn't have high acidity, so it's not tart. Medium to full body, depending on the style, and medium to medium plus alcohol. Now, Merlot is most often used as a blending grape, and that is because of that smoothness. It can help soften other wines and counterbalance high tannins. Now, you might be asking, why is it so smooth? What is it about this grape that ends up making smooth wines? And there are a few things. So, first, the grape itself has thinner skins and fewer seeds. So, if it has thinner skins, that means less tannins are going to come out during that maceration stage. And that is the stage where the wine, before it is fermented, is left in contact with the grape skins and the seeds. And then with fewer seeds, the thing is, seeds actually contain harsher tannin than the skins do. If you've ever had a chance to eat a grape off of a grapevine, like a wine grape, a lot of times they'll recommend that you not actually bite into the seed because it is so overly tannic. I remember when we had one, I think the first time we did this, we were out in Oregon, and this was like right at the very beginning. This is the thing that like caused me to get into wine. And we went out to the vineyard and said, "Here, try this. But the way I want you to eat this, and I want you to push the grape up against the top of your mouth so it like bursts and you get the juice. Then I want you to kind of feel the skins and the seeds, but I don't want you to bite into them and probably just spit them out." And I thought that was so fascinating that it's like, don't actually eat that stuff. That's going to be overwhelming. You just want the juice. And so for Merlot, because it has fewer seeds and the thinner skins, you're going to get less of that bitter flavor and structure. And then the tannins themselves, they've actually gone in and looked at this, and the molecules of the tannins are a different shape than a lot of reds. They're smaller. And so something about that means that you end up with a smoother texture. All this to say, this wine can still have layers. Don't hear smooth and think like bland or boring. It just means that it's think like velvety. Like I want to say it in like a good way, right? Okay, let's dive into where you're going to find some good Merlot. So, Merlot, believe it or not, is the second most planted grape in the world. I'm pretty sure Cabernet Sauvignon is the top most planted grape, but yeah, Merlot is right behind it. It is grown in almost all wine growing regions in the world. Now, we're not going to talk about all those because that would be a very long podcast. We're going to focus on four regions. We're going to talk about France, Italy, the US, and Chile. But Merlot is also grown in Spain, Germany, Australia, Switzerland, Austria, Bulgaria, Canada, Argentina, New Zealand, South Africa, and Hungary, among many others. So let's talk about France first. This podcast is sponsored by VoChill. When you're enjoying a glass of wine, temperature matters. And you don't need to be a wine expert to know this. You know this the minute you realize you forgot to put the bottle of wine in the fridge, and now you're stuck with lukewarm Sauvignon Blanc that is the opposite of refreshing. You know adding ice cubes will just water the wine down, but it seems like it's your only option. Not anymore. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite wine gadgets, VoChill. This gadget is as simple as it is elegant. It will keep wine perfectly chilled in your own wine glass. No more clunky metal or plastic tumblers or ice in your wine. While this gadget is an absolute must during the summer months, I don't enjoy wine without it from June to September. It's also incredibly useful for those days when you're craving a glass of white or rosé, but you don't want to wait for the bottle to chill in the fridge. VoChill offers a stemmed and stemless chiller in multiple colors, so you're bound to find one that's perfect for you. They also make the perfect gift. I should know, I got one for my mom at Christmas a couple years ago, and she loves it. Head to vochill.com, that's VOCHILL.com, to get your perfect wine chiller, and don't forget to use code CORKANDFIZZ for 15% off your order. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. Merlot is the most planted grape in France. It is not Cabernet Sauvignon. It is not Chardonnay. It is not Pinot Noir. It is Merlot. Now, there is one main region that you are going to find some really incredible Merlot, and that is in Bordeaux. Now, I think if you're anything like me and you have a general understanding of Bordeaux, the first grape that comes to mind is Cabernet Sauvignon. But turns out there's actually more Merlot, and there's some really great Merlot. So when we think about the region of Bordeaux, again, we're in Southwest France. Typically, when people talk about Bordeaux, they split it into two regions. There is the left bank and there is the right bank. And these are split by the river, I want to say the Grave River, but I might be off by that. But there's a river basically between these two regions. And the two regions have different soils and different climates. And so they tend to grow the grapes differently, right? So on the left bank, you will primarily have Cabernet Sauvignon dominant blends. And so Merlot is just going to be used to blend the Cabernet Sauvignon and kind of soften it, right? Now on the right bank, this is where Merlot becomes the star. Now it's still going to be blended. Bordeaux is very famous for doing blends, and I love that about it. But Merlot is going to be more of a star, and you're actually not going to find a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. You're actually going to find it blended more frequently with Cabernet Franc or even potentially Petit Verdot or Malbec. But again, Merlot's the star. There are two specific regions that you should be on the lookout for if you want to try a good Merlot from Bordeaux. The first one is Pomerol. It is Pomerol. Here you're going to find clay-rich soils. Remember, limestone, clay. This one's clay. You're going to find actually some single varietal Merlot. So if you want to try it not blended with anything else, Pomerol is the place to look for it. That velvety texture. And then these are going to be age-worthy. These are the ones that you can put down. I mean, I think I've tried a Pomerol from 1990. And I think I tried it a couple years ago. So that was probably about 20 years old. And it was wonderful. Like, whew, that's good stuff. Good stuff. I do recommend it if you can ever get your hands on one. So that's one region, Pomerol. The other one is Saint-Emilion. So it looks like Saint, Saint -Emilion, Emilion. Here you have limestone and clay soils. You're going to create a Merlot that is more structured and complex. So not quite as much of the velvety. It's going to be a little bit more mineral rich and maybe a little bit more acidic and a little bit more tannic. But it's going to be elegant. So again, those are your two regions in Bordeaux to look out for. In terms of outside of Bordeaux, Merlot is grown in other regions of France, especially in southern France. So like if you look more to the southeast, especially in the Languedoc-Roussillon. However, these tend to be a little less exciting. They have warmer temperatures, higher yields, and not quite that same limestone or clay soil that we want the Merlot to be growing in. That's not to say that there isn't great Merlot in the Languedoc. It's just going to be a little harder to find. All right, so moving out of France, let's talk about Italy. There are two key regions that you're going to find Merlot. So the first one is actually in Tuscany. Now, of course, if you think of Tuscany, you primarily think of Sangiovese or Chianti. But the thing is that Merlot often partners to Cabernet Sauvignon and or Sangiovese in what we call super Tuscans. These are wines that basically in Italy for the longest time, they only wanted to grow indigenous grape varieties. They only wanted to grow Italian varieties. And that's why Sangiovese is so popular. But Cabernet Sauvignon really started to get people's attention, and you could make great wine from it. And it was a really easy grape to grow. And so the winemakers in Tuscany started to grow it and started to blend it with their Sangiovese. But the people who were in charge didn't like that. And so they didn't let them call it a Chianti or didn't let them call it whatever the region was that they were growing it in. And so the winemakers were like, fine, you know what? We'll make our own thing. And that is where Super Tuscans came from. So that is where you blend oftentimes Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon with the Sangiovese. The other region where you're going to find more single varietal Merlot and where Merlot is more of the star is going to be in northern Italy and Friuli. So these can be, again, it's kind of that chameleon. They can be simple and fruity or full-bodied, tannic, and age-worthy. This area actually imported top quality vine cuttings from Bordeaux, and that's where a lot of the grapevines stem from nowadays. All right, moving across the pond over to the US, I'm going to talk about two states where you're going to find a lot of Merlot. The first is California. Now, in the 1990s, there was a craze for Merlot. It was mellow, so much rounder and more plush than a Cabernet Sauvignon. It was fruit forward. Everybody loved it, right? During the heyday. Now, this is where we're going to start talking about why Merlot has a bit of a bad reputation, especially in the US. First, we have to talk about what is called the sideways effect. So this was I think it was in like 2004, 2005. It was in the early 2000s. There's a movie called Sideways that came out. If you have not watched it and you are a wine lover, I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful, wonderful movie. However, there is one line in particular that totally changed the trajectory for both Merlot and Pinot Noir. So Paul Giamatti's character, Miles, has a famous line. They're going into California wine country, and I think he's with his friend who's on his bachelor party. But Miles, Paul Giamatti's character, is a wine snob, right? So he says, if anyone orders Merlot, I'm leaving. I am not drinking any effin', but he does not say effin', Merlot. And the thing is, Miles loves Pinot Noir. And you know what happened after this movie? This movie was so popular. The problem is that wine is something that's so intimidating that, like, if anybody tells us anything about it, we're like, yeah, let's stick with that. And so people saw that and they're like, okay, Merlot sucks and Pinot Noir is wonderful. We actually saw a drop in Merlot sales following that movie for the next at least 3 years. And honestly, it's really only been lifting in the last 5 or so years. And the Pinot Noir sales soared. So that's one reason Merlot has a bit of a bad reputation. Merlot is also very high yielding. Remember we talked about that? It can make a lot of grapes if you let it. Problem is, they're not very concentrated and they don't taste great. But California took advantage of that, right? We had some big companies that wanted to make some money. They knew they could make Merlot for cheap and sell a lot of it. So they started growing it at high yields, making pretty boring, mass-produced Merlot, and gave it a bad reputation. So all this to say, don't let that sway you. Really look for some good quality Merlot and you're going to be amazed. So even just in Napa Valley itself, yes, there are some good Cabernet Sauvignons, but there are also some incredible Merlots. You're going to get this full-bodied, smooth, velvety, bold, rich, and something a little unique for Napa Valley, a minty flavor from your Merlot. Now, the other state that you can find some good Merlot is Washington. Now, I swear I don't just throw Washington in as often as as possible, but it's true. Merlot is the second most planted grape here in Washington. It can maintain its acidity from the diurnal temp, which basically means that the temperature drops quite a bit between the day and the nighttime, so it locks the acidity in overnight. And here's the thing, I have to tell you a little story. When I was in Walla Walla this past April, I was asking every winemaker or every tour guide, whoever was with us, whoever the wine expert was, and I told them, listen, I know Walla Walla grows a lot of different grapes, and that's great, and I want to keep up with the diversity, but if you had to guess, let's say 20 years from now, which grape or which wine do you think Walla Walla should become known for? And you will not believe, but a strong, surprising majority said Merlot. Some of these people weren't even making that much Merlot. And they're like, yeah, Merlot is amazing here. We just don't make it as much because it's not as popular. But they said there's something about the climate in Walla Walla and the terroir that it creates incredible Merlot. So, hey, maybe 20 years from now, instead of saying Bordeaux is the top place for Merlot, we might have people saying, oh, yeah, go to Walla Walla, Washington. That is the place for Merlot. Before we leave Washington, one other thing that I actually noticed because I'm realizing that I've had a decent amount of Merlot from Washington. But here's the thing. A lot of Washington wineries don't label the wine as Merlot. And I think this is to combat that bad reputation. Instead, now it's not like they like bottle it and call it Cabernet Sauvignon. They're not crazy. What they do instead is they give it like the fake fancy name. DeLille Cellars does this. This was one of my favorite wineries here in Washington. It was actually the wine that we had at our wedding. But one of their wines is like 100% Merlot, but they don't call it that. It's called, oh, I couldn't even tell you what it is. But like imagine like it's called like Velvet, or like they have one called Four Flags. I think that's Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. So it's not a good example, but or like Dossier, or they just come up with a fun, fancy name, even though it's 100% Merlot. And they actually don't have Merlot anywhere on the bottle. Maybe sometimes small on the back, but they don't make it like super big and obvious. And instead, they just go, this is the wine. Doesn't that sound great? Let me tell you the flavors of it. And then after you try it, maybe they go, oh, yeah, that's Merlot. Anyways, I don't know. Maybe that's what's working for Washington. But also, we can work to change the reputation. Okay, last region here, quick. I realize I'm going on a little bit. Let's talk about Chile. Merlot is the third most planted grape here in Chile. It is really luscious. And if you remember from my episode on Carmenere, that was a previous episode of this deep dive series, the Carmenere grape was actually mistaken for Merlot for the longest time. But don't worry, they have figured it out, and there is real Merlot in Chile as well. Some of the best ones are going to come from areas in the Central Valley, such as Colchagua, Malle, Quirico, and Cachapoal. All right, let's finish off talking a little bit about logistics, kind of how to serve it, with temperatures, decanting, things like that. I feel like that's always nice to know. And it's like, okay, Haley, I bought a Merlot. What do I do with it now? For your Merlot, you're going to serve it slightly below room temperature. What this does is it emphasizes the aromas and not the alcohol. If you let it be too hot, if you serve it at room temperature, the alcohol is more apparent, and that's no fun. So to get it slightly below room temperature, just throw it in the fridge like 20 minutes before you're going to open it. Now, the problem is if you want to decant it, because if it is a robust and intense Merlot, you could decant it for up to 30 minutes. How do you know? Well, my suggestion is to taste it. Open the wine, pour yourself a small little glass, and if you taste it and it seems like there's not a lot of fruit coming through, and it's just like it almost like, and like it makes your like whole mouth kind of sticky and dry, that to me means it needs to decant. So you can throw it in a decanter, you could throw it in a vase, you can throw it in a pitcher, you can throw it in, you could also just pour your glass of wine early and let the glass of wine sit there for a little bit. Just let it open up, let it be in contact with oxygen a little bit. In terms of aging, it is usually age-worthy, but again, kind of talk to whoever you buy it from, talk to the winemaker, talk to the wine shop person, depending on what style the Merlot is and whether it's ageable. Average ones can age about 3 to 7 years. Best of the best, 15 plus. Here again, cost is going to vary. So I would look to spend at least $30 on a high quality bottle. However, I think you could probably get a good weeknight bottle for $20. I would look towards Chile for more of a budget-friendly option, and probably Friuli in Italy as well. Versus if you're going to go for something from Bordeaux or something from the US, I would probably go $30 upwards for something a little more higher quality. Now, in terms of food, really play with it. When I was doing research on this, I found a little bit of everything. And again, it's going to depend on like that style of Merlot that you get. So if you have something that's a little more fruit forward, you might want a little bit more of a lighter food. Or like when I say lighter, I mean just like not as rich. So something like pizza, barbecue chicken, mac and cheese with bacon. If you have something that's a little more robust, something a little earthier, you might want something more complex in flavor like beef short rib or rack of lamb. Okay, that's our conversation on Merlot. What do you think? Have I convinced you to give Merlot another chance? You can go out and buy yourself a bottle? I really hope so. I definitely changed my own mind, so at least I've done that. As a reminder, I'm always curious to hear your thoughts on this episode, and be sure to let me know what varietal I should cover next. So far, I think we've gotten to Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc, Chenin Blanc, Carmenere, Riesling, Barbera, and now Merlot. I may have missed one, but I tried to look back and make sure I didn't miss any. Let me know, what grape variety do you want to know next? Just message me on Instagram at corkandfizz or email me, haley@corkandfizz.com. Also, if you have enjoyed this podcast, if you've learned anything from these podcasts and gotten more confident in the world of wine, I would really appreciate it if you could take a second to rate it and leave a review. You can leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or a website called Podchaser. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. In next week's episode, I'll be interviewing a new friend of mine that I met on my Walla Walla trip. Turns out she's a Croatian wine expert. Like, what are the odds? I'm so lucky. She spends half of her life in Croatia and is incredibly passionate about the wine scene there. You're going to learn stuff on this podcast that you can't read about in books and you'd have a hard time finding online because people just don't know about wine in Croatia. It's a very unknown area with so much to explore, and we're going to talk about it in next week's episode. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to grab your free class pass at corkandfizz.com/free class pass to join my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew, and taste wine with me live from the comfort of your home for free. Cheers!